The first thing people noticed about Arthur Hale wasn't his tailored suit or the subtle shine of his platinum watch. It was the silence that followed him. At 62, Arthur was a self-made millionaire who owned half the buildings lining the riverfront. Yet every evening at precisely 7, he sat alone at the same corner table of a high-end restaurant, watching the world move without sound. Conversations blurred into lip movements, laughter became shaking shoulders, and music was only a vibration beneath the floor. The waitstaff knew him as the quiet man who smiled politely, tipped generously, and never spoke. No one knew the weight that sat with him, heavier than his fortune. Arthur had lost his hearing 20 years earlier in an accident that took more than sound. It took his marriage, his friendships, and eventually his desire to connect. His wife, Claire, tried to stay, but grief and frustration built walls they couldn't climb. When she left, Arthur buried himself in work, convincing himself that success could fill the emptiness. It didn't. Now dinners were his only routine, a way to feel part of the living world without having to engage. He liked this restaurant because the lights were warm, and no one expected conversation. On this particular evening, the restaurant was quieter than usual. Arthur unfolded his napkin and glanced around, his eyes settling briefly on the cleaning lady near the entrance. She was young, exhausted, and pushing a small stroller while mopping the floor. The manager had reluctantly allowed her to bring her baby. Apparently, she couldn't afford childcare, and quitting wasn't an option. Arthur noticed how she worked with one hand, the other gently rocking the stroller whenever it creaked. The baby inside was wide-eyed, curious, and unusually calm. Arthur ordered his usual meal by pointing to the menu. As he waited, he drifted into memories. Claire's laughter, the sound of rain he could no longer hear, the phone calls that stopped coming. Years ago, loneliness had become so familiar it felt like an old injury that never quite healed. He told himself this was enough. It had to be. Then something unexpected happened. The baby began to fuss. At first it was just a restless wiggle, tiny hands reaching out into the air. The cleaning lady froze, glancing nervously at the manager. She whispered apologies Arthur couldn't hear, her face flushing with embarrassment. Other diners turned, some annoyed, some sympathetic. Arthur watched silently, prepared for the moment to pass like everything else. But instead of crying, the baby did something strange. The baby locked eyes with Arthur. Then, with surprising focus, the baby lifted both hands and began to move them, not randomly, but deliberately. Small fingers fluttered, palms turned, hands forming shapes that made Arthur's breath catch in his throat. Sign language, clumsy, imperfect, but unmistakable. The baby smiled, repeating the motion again and again, as if trying to say something important. Arthur felt the room tilt. His heart began to pound, and for the first time in years, tears welled in his eyes. No one had spoken to him in his language in so long that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Arthur slowly raised his hands in response. His movements were careful, emotional. "Hello," he signed softly. The baby squealed with delight and clapped, then signed again, this time clearer. "Hello." The cleaning lady noticed Arthur's hands and gasped. She rushed over, eyes wide with disbelief. In broken signs, she explained that she was learning ASL because her younger brother was deaf. She practiced at home, and apparently the baby had been watching, absorbing every motion like a sponge. Arthur couldn't stop smiling. The silence around him no longer felt empty. It felt full. Other diners watched in confusion as the wealthy man and a baby had a conversation without words. Arthur laughed, actually laughed, his shoulders shaking. He signed thank you to the baby, then reached into his pocket and placed a generous tip on the table, gesturing to the cleaning lady with kindness in his eyes. She shook her head, overwhelmed, but Arthur insisted. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Arthur began to come earlier. Each evening he learned the baby's name, Luca, and the cleaning lady's name, Maria. He brought small toys, children's books with pictures, and eventually a tiny book of sign language illustrations. Luca learned quickly, eagerly, joyfully. Maria watched in awe as her baby brought light into a man she sensed had been living in darkness for years. One night, Arthur invited them to sit with him. He signed slowly, explaining that he had once believed money could replace connection. He was wrong. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she realized how much a simple act, bringing her baby to work, allowing him to be himself, had changed a stranger's life. Weeks later, Arthur did something no one expected. He showed up at the restaurant with papers and a quiet smile. He paid off Maria's debts. He arranged a scholarship fund for Luca. He funded free ASL classes for restaurant staff and offered to sponsor programs for deaf children in the city. When Maria tried to thank him, Arthur gently signed back, "You already did." The true transformation, however, wasn't in the money. It was in Arthur. He started attending community events, mentoring young deaf entrepreneurs, and even reconnecting with old friends. The walls he'd built slowly crumbled, replaced by something fragile and beautiful: hope. He realized that sound had never been the thing he'd truly lost. He had lost connection, and connection, he now knew, could be rebuilt. On Luca's first birthday, Arthur attended the small celebration. The baby toddled toward him, signed friend, and wrapped his tiny arms around Arthur's leg. In that moment, Arthur felt richer than he ever had in his life. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with noise or grandeur. Sometimes they come quietly, through small hands, pure intentions, and a language of kindness that needs no sound at all. And Arthur Hale, once a deaf millionaire dining alone, finally understood: humanity speaks loudest when we choose to see one another.